First would be any school-specific requirements, and by school I'm talking about the colleges and universities. Cover sheets are a big one. Oftentimes, and certainly with the Common application, there are cover sheets for students' letters where there will be a header that the student fills out, their name, address, and other sorts of information, and then space for the teacher to write their letter or attach a letter, and sometimes some other specific questions for the teacher to answer as well. These should go in your folder that you provide to them when you ask them to recommend you. You should also consider where the letters get submitted. A lot of high schools require that all applications that are in hard copy go through the guidance department. This is obviously different when you're applying online, and so you need to make sure if there's any sort of differences there. And some high schools don't care. They would prefer you to actually have your recommenders send those letters straight to the colleges and schools themselves. You need to know so that you can pass it on to your recommenders, because while your teachers will probably know from years of experience with your school, if you have coaches or employers that you have writing your letters for you, they're not going to know, and they're not going to know who to call to ask those questions. Next is confirming that letters get sent and received, and this can get a little tricky so that you don't look like a nag. Obviously, the best thing would be if your recommenders just told you when they had sent the letters. This is not always the way things work. If, however, your letters go through the guidance department first, this is pretty simple. You just go down and ask your guidance counselor if they've received all the letters that you're supposed to have on file. If they're supposed to go directly to the schools, you could potentially call the school about 2 weeks before the deadline and make sure that everything's been received. If not, you can try to follow up with the teachers or recommenders in person, sort of suggest that you just want to make sure that everything gets out on time. If you don't get a positive vibe back from a particular recommender that something's going to get done on time, ask them whether or not it's going to be a problem. Because if it is, then you need to know, and it's only fair, so that you can ask someone else to write you a letter. However, this is also why we have you ask probably one more than necessary person, so that you have a little wiggle room and there is a backup letter. Once letters are sent and received, you need to write a handwritten thank you note to your recommenders. Again, no emails, no text messages, no in-person thank yous. This is a formal thank you note and should become a staple of your professional life when someone does you this type of favor. And finally, and this is another thing that you need to consider in the future, you should follow up with each and every one of your recommenders once you've made your decision on where you're going to go to school in the fall. It's only nice to sort of close the loop and let your recommenders know what your decision was and how they actually helped you out. A couple of trouble spots you might encounter along the way. One of them is when a recommender agrees to write you a letter, but then asks you to write the letter for them. This can be tough because it's not really comfortable after you've written your resume and your application and your essay to write another letter about yourself in a way that's not going to look like you wrote it. It's also uncomfortable because you're sort of balancing between being too confident and maybe bragging in a letter that you're asking someone else to sign about you. Think carefully about whether or not you want this person to recommend you if that's what they ask you to do. If you're comfortable writing the letter, maybe you write it and have someone else sort of reword it so that it sounds like it comes from a different voice. The nice part about this is obviously you can make the letter focus on what you'd like it to focus on. But you need to be careful that you sort of follow the ideal letter guidelines and make it so that it actually looks like that person wrote it. The next possible trouble spot, although we don't really consider it one, is if someone declines to write a letter for you. And the reason we don't really consider this a trouble spot is simply because you would much prefer someone be polite enough to say no than to write you a bad letter. You can always ask someone else, and if you're asking like you're supposed to be months in advance, you've got plenty of time to identify somebody else. The problem is if someone declines to write for you and you've got 1 week to go and you can't think of anybody else. This is why get your ducks in a row early, ask in person and in private so that someone feels comfortable declining, and sort of be happy if someone does so that you know that you avoided getting a bad letter. The third problem, and it happens, is someone misses a deadline. With people applying to over 10 schools sometimes, it can be tough for recommenders to make sure that all of the different letters go to all of the right places. This is why most schools have these letters go to the guidance office, so it's the guidance office's problem. This can be tough, but this is why you organize your folder as carefully as possible to try to avoid any sort of missing of deadlines. This is also why you might want to approach any recommender who you can't confirm that their letter has been sent out and received about 2 weeks before the deadline. If someone does miss a deadline, get in touch with the person who it was supposed to be received by, say at the college or university, and see if there's still time to submit something for your package. If there is, see if the recommender can get it done, or if you can get a last-minute letter out of somebody else. If not, try to explain to the person at that college or university that you asked and that the letter just fell through. Again, this is why we always recommend having a backup letter. The fourth problem is getting a bland or a weak recommendation letter. Sometimes you're simply not going to know that this had happened because the letter gets sealed, signed, and delivered without you or your guidance counselor ever seeing it. However, sometimes the guidance department will decide to tell you that a letter was less than fantastic and that you should probably try to go get another one. Go ahead and get another one. The last thing you want is a bland or weak letter ending up in your package. It just doesn't do anything for you and probably hurts you more than not having the letter there at all. Finally, and this is sort of a growing trend, are peer recommendation letters. A letter that's written from one of your fellow students on your behalf for the college recommendation. Again, this can be a minefield and you need to be very careful both when you choose someone and what comes out from them. Make sure you pick someone you trust and try to make it so that the submission gets read by somebody else before it goes to the school. I would almost always recommend that you ask the peer to hand in their letter to your guidance counselor or to a teacher that you trust before it gets sent to the school. You certainly don't want to get blindsided by a bad letter that you couldn't tell was coming. Again, pick someone who's responsible and that you trust and that you think will write you a good letter, but leave yourself plenty of time and room in order to find out that you need to get another one. So I hope that's been helpful. This has been College Recommendation Letters 101. I invite you to check out our other video coaching sessions at www.mycollegecoaches.com. It's been my pleasure, and I hope I've been helpful. Have a good one, and good luck with your college applications. Bye-bye.